Hi folks, my name is Fiona McKenzie from Orange Compass, and this is a short video about complex adaptive systems, particularly focused on leadership and power. When we're looking at the system and we're trying to understand complexity, it's often useful to think about it in three parts. One is we're trying to see the system and make it visible, and there's lots of different ways to do that through conversation, dialogue, system mapping, etc. When we're working with complexity, we're really thinking carefully about things like leadership and power, which we'll focus on today. And then when we're learning and adapting, we're doing a lot of things around potentially rapid prototyping, assumptions testing, developmental evaluation, working with a systemic theory of change, all those different ways of actually trying to navigate complexity. But today we're just focused on a short video about leadership and power. As I said in a previous video, if you've seen it on complex adaptive systems, it's really this piece about making the invisible visible. That's a focus of systems thinking. And when we talk about that, we're talking about this understanding the interactions between the parts and understanding the patterns that those interactions create. An important part of that is understanding things like the nature of the relationship. And this is where power comes into play and things like trust, engagement, networks, values. And both leadership and the way we work with power are really important here. So I'm going to start with leading in complexity and systems leadership as a concept because I think it's an important framing for our conversation about power. When we talk about systems leadership, when we're talking about something that's quite different to traditional leadership or traditional management even, and also this idea of heroic leadership. So what we're talking about here is something else. It's how you lead across boundaries, so organizational sector boundaries. It's often how you lead in collaboration or how you lead when you're not in control or in charge. So if no single organization can understand or work with a system, they also can't implement the solution on their own. It means you're actually going to have to think about influence rather than pulling rank, and power with rather than power over. You're not going to have a hierarchical power over people. So part of individual systems leadership is this ability to create safe containers, hold conflict, and work with difference, all sorts of difference in values, perspectives, ways of knowing, being, and doing. At a systems level, when we talk about systems leadership, we're actually talking about leadership that's held by many, not just one, not just a leader in the traditional sense. It's leadership that's taken up at the right time, not all the time. And it's leadership that's able to draw upon the emergent and self-organising nature of complex adaptive systems by empowering others and giving them the scope and authority and mandate to do what they need to do in order to be part of the solution and part of the change. So systems leadership in this way is seeking to empower others to exercise their leadership regardless of hierarchy or the position they hold. And we need to think really carefully about what are the ways in which we're either inhibiting or enabling others to take up that role. When it comes to thinking about this from a mindset and behaviours point of view, what we're talking about here is a leader as host rather than hero. So it's really this idea of who is the person who's able to create a space, a safe space, a container, a conversation, whatever that thing is that actually helps others step into leadership for themselves. It's the ability to engage with and hold multiple worldviews and pluralities, not needing to see just one dominant worldview sort of win over all others, to foster networks and self-organising structures rather than just relying on hierarchy or the ability to pull rank. Being open to continuous evaluation and recalibration. This is quite different than situating ourselves as the expert or always having the answer. Similarly, rather than having command and control, it's about facilitating and empowering participation, participatory action, creating the container for adaptive work for those challenges that are often quite human in a lot of ways, but ways in which we navigate conflict, we deal with difference, the ways in which we bring in the voices from the edge, we bring in the no, not just the yes, all those things are adaptive work. And also manages and minimises anxiety in the system. The system is quite good at reinforcing status quo and often needing to manage or minimise the response of the system or finding points of either resistance or encouragement can be quite important. And the quote here from Mark Kabbage, which says, "You need to create the container for change that allows people to humanise each other, tolerate uncertainty and conflict, and focus on solutions." And that tolerating uncertainty piece is critical. And this mindset and this approach, we're not fooling ourselves by saying we have the answer and we can make it simple. We're saying we know it's complex, we know it's going to be uncertain, but we can live with that. And we're going to find ways to make change or make progress regardless. So for systemic leaders, what we're really asking is you to reflect about how you're showing up. What sort of roles are you taking up, whether it's as a coach, a guide, a host, a knowledge harvester, an instructor, whatever those roles are, how are they showing up and when? Who else is part of this learning? So who else is part of that learning with you in actually how to lead in this different way? And what is feedback from the system telling me? They're all really important things. Linked to working with complexity is understanding power, and particularly this is linked to leadership because a lot of the ways in which we lead traditionally draw on hierarchical power or power based on authority. And in systems leadership and systems work, what we're trying to do is change how we think, both by what we look at, so seeing the system, but also how we look at it. And power has power. So I've got two quotes here, one from Liz Skelton from Collaboration for Impact around it's really thinking about both collective and personal power, the power we've got, and how do we use that well on the behalf of the challenges we're trying to address. And Mark Yedder-Paulson talking about power, and you might recognise this pattern, it's often we don't see we've got it, and we think that someone else has it, and usually they're not in the room. So paraphrasing there, but it really is this idea that often we enroll power in different ways to either avoid a reality, change a reality, or control others in our reality. So really trying to surface that. There are different types of power. This is really important. The most obvious or known is authority-based power. So there might be sector, organizational, positional, role-based power in the system. We also have social power or privilege, advantages granted or denied due to social identity, things like class, ethnicity, mental ability, knowledge, power based on expertise, information, skills, and knowledge. So we can often claim the expert card as a type of power. Personal power, whether that's charisma, traits and skills to actually help us succeed in life. And informal power, rank in groups based on degrees of belonging. And that's a really interesting one because informal power is often dismissed because it's invisible, but we know who's got it. So it is still powerful, even if it's a different type of power. Power based on authority and position gives us a license to act. Personal power gives us the capacity to act. Another way to think about power and different types of power, and this is from another publication around power literacy, is particularly in our own work, how are different things like access, goal power, role power, etc., playing out? Access power is who has the ability to influence which stakeholders are in or out, who's been excluded. Goal power is reflecting on who's got the ability to even start a project, to influence the decisions related to its framing and the problem framing, the goals and structures of the process. Role power, who's assigning the roles to people? Who's saying you're a co-designer, you're a user, you're a participant, you're a subject. All these different things are actually types of power at play, and particularly power over with stakeholders. And rule power, the ability to influence the way in which the process will work. So whether it's in the context of design or research or other areas, it's actually this idea of we get to set rules on what we consider is normal, allowable, how we might communicate, what language is used, and even different types of knowing what knowledge is valid. They're all really important powers to be aware of, and how are we using them to shape up or perpetuate the current system. So when we analyse power, we're really thinking about how is power constructed and exerted within a system, lest we keep replicating the current one. How are we helping others to step into that space of power and understand their own role, particularly when they've never had it before? So this whole link to systems leadership, giving others agency and the ability to recognise their own power, even if they don't have hierarchical power or rank. Recognising the shift in mindset that might be required, particularly if we're used to a low power narrative. So in a lot of sectors, industries, issues, where there's a narrative of we don't have power, where someone else does things to us, and we've stuck ourselves on the margins. And this is actually about how do we turn that around? How do we shift our mindset, our narrative, and our standing, and how we engage in dialogue and power with others? And it also might require a careful rebalancing, renegotiating, or rebuilding of different power structures. The system has very embedded power structures, which we may be either inadvertently or intentionally disrupting, and that might require negotiation. So some reflection questions when we're thinking about power, particularly in your work. What spaces are opened or closed? Who's been included or excluded? Is it visible or invisible power, and has it been named? And how are communities closest to the challenge being empowered to drive change? When we're thinking about our own power and our own work, you might want to reflect on, where do you have power and in what context? What kind of power is it? How do others experience or perceive your power? What resources or privileges does your power bring? And how could you use it differently? So these are all just things to think about when we're doing this work, and to really try and reflect on, how is power playing out as an important dimension of the interrelationships between parts in the system, a thing that's setting patterns, that's controlling the way we might behave. It's a really important part of taking a complexity lens to this work. And a final piece, if you're interested, in this document here, the Social Designers Field Guide to Power Literacy, there's some really interesting worksheets that you can do around with your team, thinking about access, goal, rule, and role power, for example. So lots of ways we can take time to reflect and think about power, leadership, and our role in the system. So I might stop it there for now, and we'll see you for the next video.